Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the webinar today. I think enough has been said about the effects of the pandemic and how it's caused tremendous chaos and disruption in our interconnected, interdependent world. And today we thought that we'd get a group of lawyers across the Asia-Pacific region to talk about the future. And when I mean the future, I'm talking about us recalibrating the way we think and the way that businesses think and the way that government decides to change policy so that moving forward, we can take advantage of this crisis and how we can learn and grow from it. So a quick round of introductions for all our speakers today. We have Wei Jin from Liuming International, Beijing, China. We have Shamesh Jeevaretnam from Jeeva Partnership, Malaysia. We have Rudy Gunaratnam from Alpha and Omega Law Corporation, Singapore. And we have Rashi Mehta from Universal Legal, India. Welcome all. We are all part of the Legal Network International, which is a network of international law firms in 50 countries across the world. And this webinar is being conducted in association with the LNI. So quickly getting on to the questions of the current situation that we're in. A question for all participants, and we'll start with Wei Jin. What is the current situation in China? Can people in your country go back to work now? And can factories restart production?
Okay, now people are back to work already. You probably all heard Wuhan's lockdown was removed on April the 8th. So before that, most cities and provinces have lifted their ban already. And for us, we came back to work in early February. And at that time, there was a lot of restrictions. Now life is more like back to normal, but there's still social distancing applies. So for a business person, it's quite important to check the local rules and regulations to confirm the particular requirements and follow it. Just give an example in Beijing, we now, the government requires us to use something called Beijing health kit to check the health status of the employees, their customers and visitors and suppliers. So that app works, have all the information on the particular person. So if the person can't comply with the requirements and the person can't come in to see you, or that's applied to your visitors as well. For factories, I think factories, the government have been trying very hard to encourage people to go back to work, resume production. So the government has been putting a lot of regulations in place to encourage people to work. The most important thing is you have to, as an employer, you have to set up the systems to protect the health of your employees. For example, the factory should be clean, hygienic, and the canteen, the dormitories of the employees must follow the requirements of the government. So that's really important. If you don't follow the rules, if somebody got sick, then the whole factory could be shut down. So that downside can be really serious.
Great. Rashi, what's your view on India?
So most of the country is still in a complete lockdown as on today. It's supposed to reopen on the 4th of May, but we're not very hopeful of that actually happening in the larger metros. Bombay and Delhi, etc., are likely to remain closed. They have relaxed things in some rural areas where manufacturing has been allowed to restart, maintaining social distancing norms. So that includes working at a reduced capacity, ensuring that your workers have adequate protective gear, masks, and the like. Temperatures are checked when people enter, and for the most part, either you need to make sure that you have arrangements and the infrastructure for your employees to stay at the factory, or as an alternative, organize private transport to bus them back and forth, because public transport hasn't opened yet and it's unlikely to restart in the near future. So India has actually categorized most districts based on red, green, and orange zones, depending on the levels of cases that have been found. So the orange and green zones have been allowed to reopen to a certain extent, which are largely rural areas where there is not the same density of population. Having said that, just reiterating what Wei Jin said, that employers tend to be a little worried right now because they restart operations, and if there's even one stray case found, they'll be shut down again. So people are treading a little cautiously, and also things in the supply chain like raw materials, etc., need to be available in order for it to make sense to actually restart manufacturing, which is still something of a struggle.
Great. Shamesh, how is Malaysia faring?
Malaysia has been on a restrictive order for the last 4 weeks now. And we are supposed to get back to business on 12th May. But the indication from the Ministry of Health is that it is highly likely that we will run till end of May. We have about approximately 25 industries who are defined as essential services, and they are allowed to run their operation at 50% only. Most of other industries are completely locked down. So that actually is quite tough on certain entrepreneurs and some businesses. Similarly to India, Malaysia has the red, green, and orange zones. At this moment, we have probably about 4 states out of the 14 at the green zones. It is likely that the green zones will be allowed to be a little bit more relaxed in terms of movement, but the police and the authorities are still under strict surveillance, and as they are of the opinion that probably if we allow people to move freely, it is likely that the pandemic may reoccur. So yeah, that's what we have in Malaysia at this point in time.
Great, thanks. Rudy?
Well, in Singapore, we have what is called a circuit breaker, right? Supposed to end on May. It got extended last Tuesday till the 1st of June. Now, we were doing quite well, much relaxed in the initial stage until the numbers went up, and so circuit breakers were introduced. And what happened with the circuit breakers is the truth part was offices were shut. Any essential services were allowed to carry on. You can apply for exemption orders, Ministry of Trade and Industry, run the office. This is subject to their discretion. And many offices were turned down, especially law firms. We are not considered essential service. Right? Unless you are doing convincing work, where you have to see the client face to face to sign documents. They still haven't gone to this remote ways of signing documents yet. Right? So law firms have been affected. A lot of the cases have been postponed, adjourned. Right? Only those that can be heard through Zoom are being heard. Usually appeal cases. Okay, there's not many witnesses, no witnesses at all. Okay. As far as the businesses are concerned, the government has come up with 2 stimulus packages. The first one was for employers, where the salaries of the Singaporean workers PRs are subsidized. The first 4,005 subsidized 75% each employee. That's going to tie them out, right? What is open still today is the food industry. Our restaurants are still open, fast food is still open, but it's only for takeaways. McDonald's just shut a few days ago, including takeaways and their drive-thrus, because 7 of the employees tested positive, and they have a lot of old age staff, which are very, very high risk. So they just shut the whole thing up until further notice. Now we have a bigger problem now with our foreign workers, which we have already created a bad reputation for, sadly. The numbers are going pretty high. Last week was in 4 figures. Now it's come down to about 700 plus. The problem with foreign workers is now we have to push them off somewhere else for accommodation and for quarantine. Singapore has built up temporary shelters, hospitals to accommodate this group, right? Construction is stopped because of the increase in numbers among the foreign workers. And we also have a problem with Malaysian workers coming into Singapore because of the close down on both sides. So employers are a little bit concerned about this in the long run. So we are waiting. We also have our markets still running. Supermarkets are running. Some markets, we have a problem because there are too many going in there. So if your identification paper number and on an even number, you can only go to the markets on an even day. Right? So if it's an odd number, you go on an odd, right? Odd day. So that's how we try to keep the numbers low. Yeah, otherwise, most of us are working from home.
Right. So it sounds like there's a high degree of caution in all our countries in terms of movement of people and social distancing. And coming to the next question, I think many of our countries have expats who come from overseas, come and work in factories, in the service sector in Singapore, in Malaysia, and India. How has this impacted the movement of expats within your country? So can expats who have left the country come back and work again? Are there restrictions on that? And how are we mitigating the risks of operating of having the operations managed remotely? Has the government in your respective countries put into place some kind of regulation or restriction for expats who work in the country? Beijing?
For expats, if you got back to China before the midnight of March 27, you could stay there. Otherwise, from the midnight of March 27th, all the foreigners were not allowed to get into China anymore, even though you have a work permit. Of course, there are a few exceptions. For example, diplomats can still get into China. So this could present some challenges for foreign companies which have the senior executives who are expats. So it is, you can manage remotely, but it's not that easy. Just a few issues I think people need to remember. For example, even if you're in China as a senior executive, for example, you're from Beijing, if you want to travel to a place like Shanghai or another where your factory is, you will be quarantined in the other place for 14 days. When you come back to Beijing, you'll be quarantined for another 14 days. So that will make the on-site management or supervision a lot harder, or probably not practical. But if you're outside at this stage, all you can do is probably really have to manage your team remotely. I thought of a few ways to mitigate the risk. And I think the most important thing is to make sure your staff are safe and well, and your company or factory comply with the rules of social distancing strictly. Otherwise, if one person is sick and your factory or office will be closed completely, and the building you're in probably be closed completely, that would definitely affect your operation or production in China. So I think that's really important. As far as what we did, when we first were allowed to go back to work in mid-February, we asked our staff to travel by taxis, asked them to wear masks and wash hands and that kind of thing. And we pay for pick up the cost. And I think that's probably make our people feel a lot more comfortable. So that's the most important thing, to keep your employees safe. I think another one is probably you need to be a lot more proactive and set up a probably more robust reporting system for the office. So you make sure your team follow instructions, you talk to them, and make sure they report to you if you have they have any operation issues, so you wouldn't be left in the dark. And they have to tell you good news and bad news too. And you have to make sure that decisions not made for you, you make decisions. And I think that's quite important. And you probably have to set up a system, similar system to monitor your suppliers and subcontractors or contractors. And I think cyber safety is another issue. Different companies have different way to manage it. And I think that's another issue. Being a senior manager, you really have to consider. Otherwise, things can be out of control when you're away, even though you try to manage remotely.
Right. Rashi, India has other issues, not so many expat issues, but issues regarding labor retrenchment and austerity measures. And I understand you've been doing a fair amount of work in that area. So if you could share with us, what has been your experience advising clients on austerity measures and on retrenchment?
The government over here has actually issued a notification very early on during the lockdown, notifying that employers are not allowed to lay off labor during the course of this lockdown, which is of course fairly challenging given that people's revenues have basically gone to zero in the last 6 weeks. So to expect people to continue incurring costs without any cash flow has proven to be quite challenging. But in India, as it is, I'm sure in most countries, we have what we call labor, which is your factory workers, and then you have white collar employees who don't enjoy the labor law protections but are governed by their employment contract. The latter category of employees don't fall within that protective notification. So we are seeing some employers evaluating letting go of those types of employees, particularly ones who aren't able to productively work from home, because not all tasks are easily transitioned to a work from home model right now. So we're seeing people implement, one of four measures. The first one, which is probably ideal, is maybe just looking at a salary deferral. So people are looking at maybe 20, 30, 40% cuts with a commitment to make the employees whole at a later date. The other alternative is just doing an absolute wage cut for an interim measure of a few months till things start looking up. We're having clients exploring, asking the employees to utilize their paid leave, which is already accrued to them. And then, of course, there are people being put on unpaid leave, and the very worst scenario is being laid off altogether. So this is how things are playing out. I think obviously nobody's preference is to let people go, given that it's a time-consuming effort to put those teams in place. But that is the unfortunate reality, that people are not having the cash flows to be able to sustain the same level of costs.
Thank you. Shamesh, what's your experience in Malaysia?
As far as I think expats, first and foremost, I think most of them, unless they are in the essential services, as far as jobs are concerned, they are secure. But in terms of non-essential industries, I think they are the first one to get hit in terms of laying off from their jobs, getting laid off from their jobs. But however, in Malaysia, probably just citing COVID as a reason to lay them off is insufficient. The company must demonstrate their financial standings is either closure of business, or the company is unable to retain these expats in their establishment. So I think in most situations, expats will have recourse in the industrial court, which hears employment disputes. As far as they are traveling, most of them are unable to travel during the restriction order, the MCO order. For Malaysians working outside Malaysia, when they come into Malaysia, they are required to at least be quarantined for 18 days in about 32 hotels, which is designated in the list around Malaysia. Yeah, so that is as far as movement and employment is concerned.
Great. Rudy, I think Singapore, out of all the countries here today, relies the heaviest on expat labor, whether it's for construction or for services. So how have they been treated there?
Okay, in Singapore, when we talk about foreign expats, there are two different meaning to it. One, expats means we're talking about white collar, right? And most of our expats are working in the banking and finance industry, which is actually essential skills. Okay, so they are still pretty safe, that industry at the moment. There shouldn't be a problem, right? It is only the other foreign workers, your construction workers, who take the bulk of it, right? Plus, you have a lot of employees coming in from Malaysia who are doing blue collar jobs. These are the guys who are currently affected at both ends of the causeway. Because there's a lockdown there, there's a lockdown on my side in Singapore. So what has happened now is when they locked down, nobody could come in. There was a scramble for all Malaysians to stay in Singapore. And so there was a scramble for accommodation. Okay, so that is somewhat been eased off because some of the Malaysians sent back. Right? There's no requirement, but they are still being paid salary. A lot of them are security, working in the security industry. Okay, so now we have a problem with construction work because all construction is shut. But the government is assured that they are going to be paid their salary. They're going to be taken care of until this whole epidemic is over. Okay, so they're pretty safe in that sense. Now for SMEs, right, they are easing now on loans to SMEs. The requirement for loans from SMEs with the banks is very relaxed. You can get a loan very fast now. So I'm around 100,000. That help them tie to this difficult period. With regards to employment, local, I mentioned earlier about the 75% being paid right by the government of the salary. On top of that, the bottom line is the emphasizing of negotiations of your contracts. Employer, employees sit down and work out how we can fight through. Because the end of the day, I also tell my clients, look, this epidemic is going to end at some point. You lose your staff, you won't get them back. That's what we learn. That's where we are right now.
True. I think turning to a more burning issue, which is preservation of cash. And I think in most of our countries, there is a tremendous credit risk that a lot of the small and medium-sized enterprises run. So, Beijing, if you can share with us your perspectives on how are clients in China managing the credit risk and how are they dealing with delinquencies in recovering receivables from their customers?
I think the thing is clients are really important, but then if they can't pay you on time, or they don't want to pay you, then you will have a cash flow problem. As far as I know, I think people are probably a lot more cautious than before. They'll check the background of the customers to make sure that they are financially okay so they can pay you. So rather than giving clients either standard or extended credit terms, you probably have to do that first before you decide what it is, even though you know the customer pretty well. I think another thing is you probably have to make sure that you don't lose your right to take legal action against them to recover the receivables if needed. Of course, to take actions against your client is double-edged sword. You take actions, you probably lose your client forever. That's probably the same situation for lawyers as well, but if you don't do it, then you probably don't get money anymore. I've seen people negotiating a probably longer term for a certain amount of payment, not a full amount, probably a small percentage, and try to get a client to understand or customer to understand your situation, so you work out a solution together. Another one, it might be possible to get a third party to give you a guarantee for the payments, and that could be probably local government to see where they can give you the hand.
Right.
It is a tough issue for everybody.
It is very challenging for everyone, including India. And we have moratorium plan that the government has introduced. We have changes to the insolvency code. Rashi, what's your perspective on this?
This is a problem that across industry everybody is going to be facing, big or small, really speaking. And I think our advice to clients is be flexible, but be persistent. in at least recovering old dues, because we're seeing a lot of people actually being quite opportunistic. And as Shamesh said, in terms of laying off people, people are using this opportunity also not to clear old dues, which have really nothing to do with the current situation. So you have that one bucket of outstandings. And then, of course, going forward, there are certain measures that you can look to put in place. Maybe, a shift to a model where you're asking for LCs, or, bill discounting, where at least people are, some amount of what you're supposed to receive gets secured up front, or do credit checks on people. As Mohit just said, though, the government in India has announced a 3-month moratorium on the repayment of loans, which essentially means you're not really going to know whether people have been defaulting for another 3 months, because this is not supposed to reflect on their credit reports for the next 3 months at least. So till sometime in October, November, you won't know whether people's credit history has been impacted as yet or not. So I'm not sure if that's going to be a good measure for the short term, but in the long term, it probably makes sense to ask for that before proceeding and deciding on any credit terms.
That's very interesting. Shamesh, does Malaysia have similar measures?
Yeah. So I think many of my clients have approached us and indicated their concern on how to manage their credit risk. One, I think we have drawn up certain plans for them. I think it's important for them to identify the customer or their client's financial standing first before they also have to probably secure a certain amount of assurance from the customers, such as guarantee or indemnity letter from the directors before they do business. Simply because just in case the company gets into an insolvency, there is a recovery mechanism towards the directors to recover the debts owed to our clients. The Companies Commission of Malaysia has recently, as effective 26 April, has increased the threshold of insolvency proceedings. A company is only deemed unable to pay its debts when the Companies Act provides 25,000 initially, but this for to December, the inability to pay its debt would be 50. So I think it's an indication to suppliers, the businesses out there, that they have to be careful before they deal with another or their customers or their client and manage their credit. Even loans to banks, but I think that would not help because my opinion is that it is actually a snowball effect. When you do that, I think companies naturally take advantage of the situation.
Right.
Yeah, that's my take as far as
that's great. So Rudy, Singapore has a very heavily regulated monetary authority. What have they done? Have they put into place measures that protect businesses or borrowers? What have they done there?
What they have done, besides easing up of SMEs to take up loans with the banks, the requirements, we have also come up with an act, a new act, which is called the COVID Temporary Measures Act. And some of your commercial contracts, like tenancy agreements, banking loans, these areas, you cannot now sue the debtor. Right? I give a simple example. If I'm a tenant and I'm unable to pay my rent, my landlord cannot sue me. Right? Currently, it's for a period of 6 months. subject to extension, which is all the way to the end of the year. Right. So during this period, the landlord cannot sue the tenant for arrears in rental. Similarly, the banks cannot sue you for a default in your loans. Okay? They have to hold their hands on the matter. But this only kicks in, right, if the debtor files what is called an assessment with the Ministry of Law. They will assess, they have a panel who will assess whether unable to pay is directly due to the current situation. Right? It's got to do with the COVID virus situation. If that is established, yes, then there is no more, you cannot sue the debtor. Right? And any outstanding ongoing court matters, arbitration matters will all come to a standstill. You can't continue with it. Right? So we are keeping this very nicely. So lawyers are not happy about it. Right? Everybody is stuck here now. But you talk about snowball effect, right? Because after 6 months, it's going to continue.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So again, it goes back to this issue of negotiations. Landlord tenant have to sit down and talk. What do we do in the meantime, right? Can I give up my lease? These are the things that they talk about. Give up my lease. Can I sublease? All right. So negotiations is a big thing now. You should. Yeah.
Yeah. Now that's very interesting, because what I hear you saying is that the force majeure interpretation in contracts, which is essentially what we need to do as lawyers, that has been taken over by the government. But the government decides under what circumstances can you invoke a force majeure in a contract. And I think it's very similar to what I heard on a webinar a few weeks ago, where Shamesh was also present, where there was a discussion within the African continent, different countries, and all of them said the same thing, that all of this is unprecedented. I don't think we've seen a global crisis of this magnitude since the Spanish flu of 1918. So there's no precedent in the last 100 years that helps us deal with whether the situation is a force majeure event or not. And Singapore seems to have made it fairly straightforward in terms of they will assess whether the situation calls for a force majeure invocation or not. The rest of the countries on this panel are going to have to deal with it the way we deal with it, in the regular course. And I think it all boils down to negotiation. So that's very interesting. Turning to a much broader issue now, since we are all living in a very interconnected, interdependent world, and cross-border business, especially businesses across countries, has come to an essential standstill. Where do all of us see this going forward? How do you think that the approach to cross-border transactions will be impacted by the crisis? And what measures would you advise your clients on how to secure themselves going forward now in the new world? Beijing.
I think definitely things have changed. In the past, probably people went to China to source products or to sell products to China. If you buy product from China, probably because you're driven by cost or probably efficiency and shorter lead time, production lead time. Or if you try to sell to China, you probably look at the market and the market share and also profit margin as well. But I think now you probably have to be a lot more risk averse. Really have to check to see, whether the company or market you're dealing with is still making you feel comfortable. Like the business owners and managers probably need to consider whether you can get a good shift from either China or other countries to your place. How easy it is to get it out, and what is the realistic time for the goods to arrive at your place. And you also need to check whether there are any restrictions on the suppliers, your foreign suppliers' capacity to deliver. Do they have all the permits to deliver? Before, it's probably not a big issue, but now if one can't deliver, you will sign the contract, and then that's probably affect your performance as well. So I think the clients probably need to be a lot more careful about who they're dealing with. They probably need to do legal due diligence, more detailed compared with before, and really check the financial, the legal background of the client, of the customers or the suppliers or contractors to see where they can deliver. And also you'll probably need to check the financial standing as well to see whether if they fail, whether that drag you down or not. What we found recently is something quite interesting. Is in terms of the supply, medical supply contract. Some companies in China have expanded their line of business recently. So they say they can deliver certain like medical gowns for doctors. They say they could deliver. But when we check the client, whether they have all the permit or not, they say, no, we are still in the process of applying. That could be months rather than weeks. So we tell the client, look for another supplier. So I think this kind of thing, you've got to be a lot more careful compared with before.
All right. Rashi, do you see any kind of geopolitical shift or advantage to India, given the way India has managed the crisis in terms of the death rate?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are definitely significant challenges to all cross-border transactions right now. India, for instance, has put in place export restrictions on certain things, particularly around medical equipment and pharmaceutical drugs, etc. So even though there may be a significant demand from outside of India, we're unable to meet that because we're simply not allowed to export for the moment. Similarly, last week we had some new exchange control laws introduced to limit foreign investments from neighboring countries into India under the automatic route, which essentially means government approval will be required for any foreign investment from 3 or 4 countries that we share borders with. I think the other big challenge that we're seeing with cross-border transactions is particularly where there is a language or a cultural barrier, which could probably only be overcome by face-to-face meetings. But because of the travel restrictions, that's simply not possible right now. So transactions are taking a lot longer. It's harder for people to communicate their positions effectively. So these are the challenges that we're grappling with. And I think going forward, particularly from an Indian point of view, yes, we're hoping to see, maybe a little bit more of a rebalance in terms of attracting certain manufacturing. People may be looking to hedge their risks across multiple geographies rather than being entirely dependent on one or two. It's important, I think, also for foreign exchange risks to be protected against. I mean, the rupee has significantly depreciated in the last few weeks, something which people may not have been looking to do, but I think going forward will need to start protecting themselves against. So, of course, it could work in your favor if you're exporting services like we sometimes do. But, for people supplying out of India, supplying into India or buying raw materials from outside of India, this is going to be a significant challenge going forward.
Thank you. Shamesh, how is Malaysia ring fencing or preparing to take advantage of the crisis?
Yeah. So I think as far as advice to clients, I think we have to probably ask them to negotiate contracts, but we have to identify whether or not it's going to be inbound or outbound. As far as inbound, I think it's important for Malaysian companies to check the shipments from wherever the shipments are coming, lead time, probably they have to renegotiate terms because their manufacturing activities could have slowed down due to this pandemic. Logistics issues need to be probably reorganized. Financing, they probably need to look at their bankers on how they can probably delay and use the moratorium facility given by the government. Supply of goods to their customers, lead time or supply of goods. As far as outbound, probably they have to look at the delivery period to their customers out of the country. They need to ensure that they secure their payment from the customer out of the country. So there are a few things that I think any company operating in Malaysia need to look at before they move forward post-COVID, as far as I'm concerned.
Right. Rudy, what's your outlook?
Okay, my outlook is if I need to advise my clients on these cross-border transactions, first thing I would do is to draft a one-page clause on force majeure, right? Because I believe that this current situation has woken a lot of people up to the reality of how loose this clause has been used, right? So when you talk about force majeure, I think things have to go in for my clients as to, first of all, what amounts to force majeure, right? Secondly, how long does it last and when does it end? I think it's got to be more descriptive, more detailed into it instead of just one lines. Okay, that is of concern to me. Second thing, besides all this, doing your due diligence, which are equally important, is I think as lawyers we should advise our client to also keep a very close and continued interest in the politics of the country that you are doing business with. Right? I believe in today's situation, everybody's got their own idea what a lockdown is. You can have everything in a contract, but don't know how the politics is going to work out. Okay? A very good example is Singapore and Malaysia. Because both countries have close relationships, Malaysia very graciously continued to allow food supply to go to Singapore. Now, that's very, very important. Right? You can have a contract, they can end, but Malaysia allowed the food to come in. All their trucks came in. No disruption. And it's political relations between countries. Very important. Right? That's my take on that.
No, that's a very good point you make. In fact, just to add to that, I think most of our countries rely heavily on China for the protection kits and for pharma medicines that come out of China for this COVID. And it's incredible to say that the Chinese government has been proactive in actually keeping a price control on all equipment that is crucially required by all countries. So there is a high level of interdependence, as there will be, and it's important to look at the political situation in each country before actually transacting or trading with them. I think some very good points, some great perspectives. I think it's a privilege that all of us belong to a legal network that gives us leverage across jurisdictions in the world. It looks like Asia Pacific is going to lead the way out of this crisis for the rest of the world. We have always been resilient, we've been proactive, and I think the way in which we approach a crisis is that we don't look at it as a tragedy, we look at it as an opportunity. So keeping that in mind, thank you Vajan, thank you Rashi, thanks Shamesh and Rudy and all our attendees today. I think there's a lot of optimism here in the room, and I hope that our clients will benefit from the perspectives that we've shared today. Thank you. The floor is now open for questions. And before I request anyone from the audience to ask questions, we have two questions on the chat room. For Shamesh, Malaysia, good afternoon. This is from Charlotte Williams. The question is, many Malaysian businesses have significant business presence outside Malaysia. How do you think we can mitigate this loss?
Yeah, I think in terms of employment, it's imperative for the company to engage with local lawyers and ensure that the local team, right, in terms of employment, it is imperative for the company to engage with local lawyers and ensure the local team collate sufficient information on relevant subject matters, such as layoff, retrenchment, and termination laws. In the perspective of operations, I think it's important, paramount for the company, if in the event the company is considering a sizing down, embark on a due diligence on basic subject matters such as receivables, materials, contractual obligations to customers, tenancy on premises, credit facilities or owings to financial institutions, and also to avoid litigation due to late delivery, for instance. I encourage a company to renegotiate terms with their customers. This is to avoid any unnecessary litigation, because I think the last thing any company would want to delve into now would be litigation. So it would be good for anyone to get into mediation, for example, have a soft approach, speak and try to negotiate and sort out any problems. For companies who are enjoying financial support from any Malaysian agencies or venture capitalists, they may want to engage with them and also renegotiate terms and speak to them and probably draw up strategies. Yeah, that's my take.
Thank you. We have another question here for both Malaysia and Singapore. The question is, some of our corporate clients employ expats who hold high positions are not allowed to come back due to strict border control. How can a company mitigate its risk and at the same time ensure compliance with local regulations? This is for both Rudy as Shamesh. Rudy, if you could go first, please.
Yeah. Right now, the regulations, if you want to bring back an expat employee, the employer has to apply for special permit. Right? Each case will be dependent, as usual, on its own circumstances. And some of these circumstances, I believe, is the key status of the staff concerned. Is he a key personnel? Right? For example, he could be the manager of a plant, for example, right? Is he the manager of a essential service? Not all officers can apply for the staff to come back. They have to show that they are part of the essential service, and these are the requirements that the authorities will look at. And when they come back, they are still going to be quarantined again for 14 days at least. So this will take some time, and there are issues with regards to if you bring back your employee, who's going to pay for his salary. Ministry of Manpower has already, I think it's very clear from Singapore's perspective, is that the employer has to share, right, the burden of continuing to pay the salary if he's in quarantine because you want him back. There are also issues whether you can work remotely. This is something Singapore is trying to emphasize in a very big way, because I believe it also ties up with our ambition of becoming a smart city. So this current situation is probably a very good gauge as to how far we are in that policy.
Thank you.
Okay.
Shamesh?
I think mitigating the risks without an expat, embracing technology at this juncture is paramount to ensure seamless communication between the expat and the local team, for example, in Malaysia, so that communication, decision making can be done immediately, instantaneously. But probably important matters such as financial impact on the company, it is imperative for the company to make collective decisions. Keeping shareholders' interests is very important, especially for publicly listed companies. They may have high-ranking expats who may not be able to come back to Malaysia. To ensure that they comply with the agencies such as Security Commission, Bursa Malaysia, the company's commissions, policies, guidelines. Keep engaging with local authorities to ensure the companies do not float any law. The Companies Commission actually recently has come up with an SOP. If there's any companies intend to defer their annual general meeting or the extraordinary general meeting, they can apply for an extension of time through their company secretaries, not the directors. But this this is not applicable to private companies. It's only public listed companies. So there are standard SOPs been published in the websites.
Thanks. Now here's a question for all the panelists. Post-COVID, as far as the legal industry is concerned, can we expect a major shift in lawyers going on about their business? That is, be it meetings with clients remotely or conducting hearings via court virtual hearings. Will this be the new norm, and will this work within the current provisions of law? Vision, if you could start with you, please.
I think things will definitely change. You can, I mean, in China now, our people have, my lawyers have done the court hearing online. So I think that's a new norm. That's probably keep going for a while. But as far as meeting client goes, and I think it is difficult. People like us probably travel a lot. Now you really can't travel to see the client, the same thing with the client. So we have to find a better ways or more creative ways to engage with the client. Probably we can do, talking to the client regularly, talking to our associates in different countries regularly to make sure that we forget about each other. But as far as dealing with the government, I think that things change too, because for some authorities, they prefer you to file things online and contact them by phones, whatever, rather than be there in person. I think that has changed as well.
Thank you. Rashi, how about India?
I think on the client side of things, this transition was already in the making, right? Particularly with cross-border M&A, etc. Traveling at that frequency was just simply not possible. So things had already transitioned to happening virtually. I mean, for that matter, even within the city of Mumbai, oftentimes because of the traffic situation, you would just prefer to jump on a Zoom conference call with clients. So I think that transition had already started. I do think that the law needs to significantly evolve, both in terms of procedural stuff as well as court filings, etc., which currently were all done physically. And we'll have to see how they implement measures to manage security on one side of things, as well as just ease of continuing legal proceedings. So there are a lot of practical challenges that we are currently encountering because the system hasn't obviously ever contemplated a situation like this, and it'll be interesting to see how the government updates laws to accommodate for this evolving virtual situation that we find ourselves in.
Great, thank you. Shamesh, what about Malaysia?
Last week, but to the exception of trials, only hearing at the appellate court has been permitted at the moment. But the downside of it, I would think, coming from my experience in litigation, through video conferencing, having a hearing, you do not have the personal touch, conveying your argument to the judicial officer. But the good thing about it is matters start running, no delays, especially in criminal matters, or probably some hard-pressed corporate commercial matters. I think it's good. It's time-saving. Matters are still going on. It will be a new norm.
Rudy? Thank you. Rudy, how about Singapore?
Well, in Singapore, ours is just a continuation, business as usual, except for matters regarding hearings where we have witnesses. Otherwise, we have already embarked on e-litigation where all our civil litigation documents are filed electronically. So we don't have to worry about that. And for the criminal matters, we also have a system of its own. It's called a ICMS. So basically, that system allows the accused and his lawyer to see everything that goes on in there. And that system allows you to even make an application online for an adjournment of a matter. So the charges to be downloaded even before you go to court. So it's an ongoing thing, not much. Currently, most of the pre-trial conferences are only rescheduled unless they're very, very urgent and it has to go on. Otherwise, we're pretty much the same. It's business as usual. With regards to clients, it depends on which which areas of the law is your speciality, right? And if you're talking about, for example, criminal clients, most of our criminal clients would want to see their lawyers in person. We haven't reached a stage where we have criminals, clients who are charged with criminal offences who are online, who are comfortable with it yet, right? But we do it ourselves. I mean, if you use a WhatsApp, that's online already, right? So it's the same thing. I don't have to see my client. Yeah, that's our current situation. Yeah.
Thank you. Specific question for India, Rashi. Another looming issue post-lockdown will be lack of manpower or workforce, as most workers are migrant workers and may not be able to return to work soon. What is your view on how the government will ensure that there is a sufficient number of workers to come back to the workforce?
This is certainly going to be a challenge because particularly in cities like Mumbai, where we do have a lot of industry still, most of the manpower are migrant laborers, a lot of whom have tried to return to their villages during this lockdown period. But what the states are trying to do, and I guess it remains to be seen whether it will be successful or not, is to try to create a state repository of labor that is available. So people actually go and register themselves, probably along with their skill set, and then based on that, you can access that repository and see whether you have the required manpower that your manufacturing unit needs. So you may not really be getting labor that you've been used to working with, and there may be some element of retraining, reskilling, which will be required to be done. But I think in the near term, it is unlikely that state borders will open up and the migrant labor will be able to return. So that is certainly one of the challenges that manufacturing units are going to face while restarting operations.
Thank you all. I think it's been a pleasure hosting all of you here today. Thank you, attendees. Thank you very much.